What was Russia like in 1917, and what were the problems with ruling it? The first thing that you have to understand about Russia is that it's absolutely huge. It is 92 times bigger than Britain. This is 22.3 million square kilometres big, which is about a sixth of all the land on the planet. Most of the major cities tended to be in the west near Europe, but as you can see, in the east particularly, there are huge grey areas that are basically ungovernable. Just to give you an idea, it is about the same distance from Moscow here in the west to Vladivostok in the east, as it is from Moscow all the way across Europe, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to New York. That is about the same distance. Because of this, transport is very, very slow, and the snow and the mud in Russia do make things even worse. It can take up to 2 weeks to cross Russia by railway. And even these new railways only connect up bits of Russia, so there's great big areas that are largely sort of unexplored. Communication is very, very slow due to this. It takes a very, very long time to get messages across, so it makes this very, very difficult to govern Russia consistently. The second problem is to do with all the different nationalities. There are 128 million people living in Russia in 1900, but there were over 200 different nationalities. Only 55 million people actually speak Russian in Russia at this time. And they live in very, very different ways, very different climates. They're very, very divided. Some of them live in like snow conditions, some of them live in the desert, others somewhere in between, depending on the time of year. But despite these very, very different lifestyles, they are all expected to conform to the Russian way of doing things. And this was known as Russification. The one thing that these people did have in common was that most of them were peasants. 93.7 million people were peasants at this time. Over half of them had no land or homes. They used old-fashioned, inefficient methods when farming. At the same time, population was increasing and there were more people moving to the towns to look for work. This means that more food was needed because the population was increasing, but there were fewer workers to grow it because they're leaving to go to the towns, which means that food shortages in Russia at this time are very, very common. At the other end of the social scale, all the wealth and power rested in the hands of 1 million people, the nobles. These guys never go hungry when there are food shortages. So as you can see, Russia is a divided country with much social inequality. We've got the very, very rich, just 1 million people, versus the very, very poor. That's everybody else. As I mentioned before, more and more peasants were moving to towns and cities to look for work in the factories because Russia at this time is going through a period of industrialization. Lots of these cities were in the west, places like Moscow and St. Petersburg, and lots of peasants were moving there. Life here wasn't easy. The hours were long, the pay was low, and accidents were frequent. Factory workers lived in the slums, with about 10 people in one room taking it in turns to sleep. And food shortages here were even more common than they were in the countryside. Yet despite all this, this is still better than being a peasant, which just goes to show how miserable it was actually to be a Russian peasant. So to sum it up, there are 4 main problems when ruling Russia. The first problem is Russia's size. It just takes so long to try and get messages across and to travel across and see it all and keep it all under control. Second problem is all the different nationalities. Remember, there's 200 different nationalities. Not everybody agrees with the way that things are being done in Russia at that time. The third problem is the big, big gap between the rich and the poor, this social inequality. And the fourth problem is the effects of industrialization, with people moving to the towns, which then leads to food shortages. Now, we've had a past exam question on this in the past, which was describe the problems with ruling Russia in 1917. It's a 6-mark question, and what you need to do for a 6-mark question is 3 developed points. So you can pick any of the 3 points we've mentioned, say what it is, and say why it's a problem. Do that for each of the points and you should get 6 marks.